Right, my name is Gordon Easingwood. I'm chairman of the local history society, and I've been a fisherman for just short of 59 years. So why was the castle built there? Well, a good question, but if you look at a map of East Lothian, it's quite easy to see that Dunbar sits on a promontory. And if you go further afield, you'll see that it's quite tight to the Lammermuirs. And coming up from Berwick is like a funnel. And to get to Edinburgh and Stirling, as in medieval times, you would have to pass Dunbar. And just to recap some of the, not recap, but to cap some of the interesting history of the Dunbar Castle, which goes back a long, long way. And obviously, because it goes back a long, long way, the accounts are somewhat clouded and thinking, but I'll do my best. In 680, the Bishop of Ripon, St Wilfrid, he was incarcerated in Dunbar Castle. And probably at that time it wasn't as we know today, because it's not. It's been developed as the years go by and techniques are improved. It was only when the Norman conquest came, and the Normans were great castle builders, and of course the thing was that they had the technology, and probably the first time that there was a castle of any significance in Dunbar was about 1070, after William the Conqueror had landed, and one of his vassals, the Cospatrick Earl of Dunbar, did some treacherous things against him, and he was banished up to Scotland. And he was related, Cospatrick was related to Canmore, and Canmore took pity on him and gave him the lands around Dunbar. So around 1070, the first stone castle was built. And about that time, just prior to that, there wasn't much use for castles, because Alexander II and Alexander III, it was a very peaceful time, but the castles were still being built. And it's about just after that we get a bit conflict, and when Edward Longshanks came up to raid Scotland, the castle came more and more into prominence. And when the Maid of Norway died, after Alexander fell off his horse at Kinghorn, the nobles in Scotland were in turmoil, and a lot of them threw their hat in the ring to be the next King of Scotland. But there was so much turmoil that Edward I came up to Scotland, and he nominated John Balliol. And there was a bit turmoil there, but there wasn't so much need for a castle, because Edward was so powerful. It's only when you go back a little bit further, there was to-ing and fro-ing with the different sovereigns, and probably in the next time is of any significance is the famous Black Agnes, daughter of Earl Murray, a very prominent family of Scotland. At one time in 1336-37, the Earl of Cospatrick went up north with the king, and to quell some insurrections from the Scottish nobles, and Black Agnes was left on her own, which you would think would be a bit of a no-no, but being the Earl of Murray's daughter, she was up to the task, because unbeknown to her, the Earl of Salisbury, Montague, the Earl of Salisbury, he came up and blockaded the castle, and it lasted for 6 months. And there's a lot of fable tales about this, that and the next thing, but she stoutly held out for 5-6 months until she was rescued by Alexander Ramsay of the Baths, and he took victuals in by darkness, and Montague saw that the siege was futile, so he withdrew and that is basically the story of Black Agnes. Yeah, so after Black Agnes had that impregnable fortress, there was not much threat to the castle itself, and it probably went back and forth because unlike a lot of people, people seem to think that it was Scots against English like it probably is in the Wars of Independence, but it wasn't such. They tended, because sometimes the Cospatricks, Earls of Dunbar, fought on the English side, and sometimes they fought on the Scottish side. So it's just that somebody came to your door or your castle and they were English, you didn't say you were Scotch, and vice versa. So there was to and fro, and in the interim, this castle was being built stronger and stronger, which takes us to probably one of the most iconic figures to visit Dunbar Castle, is our Mary Queen of Scots. And I won't go into detail about why she went to France and when she came back, but when she came back to Edinburgh, she had quite a varied and spectacular life, and she married Lord Darnley, and he was a bit of a rogue, and he was instrumental in killing the favourite secretary of Mary Queen of Scots, Rizzio, David Rizzio, and Rizzio was killed in front of Mary Queen, and she was so distressed she left the safety of Holyrood Palace and she came down to Dunbar to seek solace and get her head round what was happening. And the next time Mary Queen of Scots came down was after Lord Darnley was murdered. And by implication, Earl Bothwell was implicated in that one. So she did, they called it the Great Bastion. And the next time came was Lord Bothwell, Earl Bothwell, abducted her at Seaton Castle and brought her down here and allegedly raped her, and 3 months later they went to Edinburgh and they were married, and unfortunately they didn't live happily ever after. She was starting to get the nobles being unsettled of her hurried marriage to Earl Bothwell, so they confronted the Queen, and the Queen sent out from Dunbar Castle to all her followers in the vicinity to come to rally to the flag, and they proceeded to Carberry Hill, which is just outside Dalkeith, and the Scottish nobles confronted her. And one of the ironic things is that it's known as the Battle of Carberry Hill, but there was not a shot fired in anger. It's quite an anomaly. But we won't go too much into that. The next thing, Earl Bothwell, we don't know if she was, when she surrendered, we don't know if he just absconded or she begged for safe passage. But the outcome was that he came back to Dunbar Castle, knowing that it was impregnable. But as time went by, the Scottish nobles said that in pain of death, if anybody was seen to assist Earl Bothwell, they would be executed. So Earl Bothwell was in Dunbar Castle, and he knew that there was just a matter of time. So he left in a small boat and went up to the Orkneys, Shetlands, I think. Yeah, so after the Mary Queen of Scots left and the Scottish Parliament decreed that the castle should be Casset Down and Albany's away to the lowlands, the castle was left, and it was a ready-made quarry, and it was used certainly in the townhouse, our own townhouse, and probably many other buildings in the town. And in fact, one account said that a large part of the stones was taken to Leith for the new wharf. So, you know, they didn't have brick and tile works in these days, so that's where it went. a space of time passed, and the next time it comes into prominence was when the Fishery Board wanted to extend the Victoria Harbour, the Dunbar Harbour, and they laid up plans for put out tenders, and in 1837 there were some quite different ones, but they chose this one, and the famous Stevensson family of world fame with the lighthouses and their engineering firm, they got the contract for doing the Dunbar Castle. Now, although it was still a formidable size, there was where to put the entrance, and there was allegedly 40 fishermen up the castle with the engineers to see which one would be preferable for the fishermen to use, and it was decided that they would use the one called the Blue Cavern. But it took a fair bit of castle away, and one of the most important things that it took away was the eastern tower. Now, the East Tower is one of the most powerful bastions of the castle, and it's no longer there. And these sort of things make it look like a castle, which is not as it is now. In fact, it was said that Dunbar Castle was a victim of its own success. I think I'm right in saying that it was the first time, certainly in Scotland, that a controlled dynamite explosion, an electric dynamite explosion, was carried out. And it took several years to construct it, and it was a great Masonic event in the town on the opening. And across to my left there is a flagstone for a time capsule, but unfortunately nobody took record of it, and nobody that I know knows of it now. And it opened up the Dunbar port with this new entrance to larger boats, and commerce increased dramatically because there was potato boats, grain boats, and also produce coming in. So it was just after that it was, but unfortunately the boom times didn't last too long, because in 1846 the British Railway, the North Eastern Railway, opened from Edinburgh to London. Although it stopped at Berwick and had to cross by boat, it was the demise of the trade, because it was quicker to go by train than ships. So as a youngster being brought up in and around the harbour, it was a fabulous place to play. We had many adventures up the magazine, which is a very difficult part, but to get up. But the castle itself, there was one time there was a Coast Guard station there, and my father was an auxiliary Coast Guard, and I remember as a youngster running up these probably be going about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in a winter's evening, but with armed with the stories of Black Agnes and such like, witches and whatnot. It didn't take me long to run up and run down, I can tell you. But we used to look out in the telescope and whatnot. But there were, even in the summertime, it was thronged with visitors, courting couples, you name it, because it was very accessible and had a great vantage point. You can see, 360 degrees, and they see up the Forth to the Bass Rock and Tantallon Castle in North Berwick, and you can see right down to St Abb's Head and all the low-lying fields and agricultural land leading up to Dunbar. Children to play at the castle is world-famous John Muir, the father of conservation, and he talks about his love of everything that was wild and old, and he talks about And the best of all, in the glorious storms, to watch the waves thundering on the black headlands and craggy ruins of the old Dunbar Castle, when the sea and the sky and the waves and the clouds were mingled together as one. And he said later in his life, he was president of the Sierra Club and they started Yosemite National Park and whatnot, but he always referred to Dunbar as the castle ruins and the wild North Sea shaped his love. He always talked about that. He came back here in 1893 and he visited, and but in the books that he's written, he's mentioned it several times. It's not just a boyhood fantasy. It's really shaped a man of world fame. And we always aware at the spring and early summer of the lovely little Kittiwake. Now, before I went to school with my next door neighbour, we used to go along the bottom of the castle and see ones that were inadvertently fell out the nest. And we used to put them in the cardboard boxes from the local grocer's shop, and we thought that their staple diet should consist of milk and a little bread. But we kept them until they were ready to fly, and we just hopefully didn't poison them, and hopefully they went away into it. But since then there's been a big increase in the kittiwakes, and by the way, Dunbar is very fortunate that some kittiwake populations are getting depleted quite drastically, but it's a true saying that the kittiwake population is a monitor for the state of the seas round about, because they are not diving birds, they are not scavengers. They rely on the little sand eels on the surface. So it's obviously, because it's been pre-COVID, it's been obviously, it was healthy, but post-COVID we've not had many chances to see how they've been developed. But there's fulmars, there's gannets, cormorants, and many birds that are bringing it. And of course, the cheeky herring gulls, they are always there or thereabout. Yes, what improvements would I like to see in the future? Well, I would like to transfer a real castle and put it on our site, because it's, I wouldn't say it's embarrassing, but people have heard and read so much about this powerful bastion, and they come down and it's not what they expect. But if I was to say the future should hold for it, since 1990, when the passageway fell down, 91, 92 I think it was, because of health and safety, things have clammed up, but I can assure you that the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, well, 80s, a lot of people throughout the world have been up there and taken advantage of the vista that's been seen out there. But obviously it's overgrown and whatnot, but there's a true saying, where there's a will, there's a way. If the will was there, it could be such an advantage, an iconic place to visit, and with interpretation boards and a wee bit goodwill, it could be restored to what we knew as children. It was just, you had to walk up the castle. Nobody ever thought anything of it. And it was such an iconic view. Yes, you can see the sea from the promenade. Yes, you can see the sea from the battery. But nothing can hold a light till you get on top of the castle. Edinburgh Castle has one of the highest rates. I think it is the most popular tourist attraction in town. I'm not saying for 1 minute that it compared with Edinburgh Castle, but I know there is an appetite, having worked in the town house for 25, 30 years. They come from far and wide. We've had New Zealanders, Australians, Canadians, and especially Americans, and they're quite well versed on the history and that, and they want to see it. It's just, there's a great attraction to actually be there. They don't want to look at it, they want to be part of it. And to me, that would be Dunbar's Edinburgh Castle or North Berwick's Seabird Centre. It's a really focal place. I once had the privilege of taking Magnus Magnusson up there, and he was astounded at the view. And he wrote in his History of Scotland about it. And what they don't realise is that when you're up there, you can actually see, without too much imagination, about how it was defended. And the other thing is you can see Castle Street and Church Street, because that's just the same as the Holyrood and Edinburgh Castle and Stirling Castle and Holyrood, you know, different. But if it is possible to open the attraction safely, I'm sure it would be a tremendous boon for Dunbar in the future.